Hey guys, welcome to another episode of a Shop Shop. This week I'm going to go help a subscriber put his car back together. Alright, so before we start this video, I just wanted to put it out there. I didn't know Mikey. I saw his posts on Facebook and he obviously needed some help, so I offered to help him out and drive up to his place. He's not too far from me, he's about an hour. So I went up there to give him a hand to swap these engines over. Didn't know him at all, so I didn't film any intros, I didn't film anything, because I didn't know if I was going to rock up and he was going to be really strange and then I'd just bail. But he's a good dude and we did get a few days together. So we did this video over 4 different days, over about 3 or 4 weeks. So I hope you enjoy. So I'm going to do this video a bit different to normal, and I'm going to put my head down in the corner and I'm going to talk to you guys over the time lapses and try and explain what's going on, because there wasn't a whole lot of narration while I was filming. Alright, so this first car is the Sirion. This is the donor car. So Mikey's been driving this around and we're pulling the engine out to put into the Sior. So the plan was to just pull all the front end off, rip the engine out, get it ready to be resealed, put a new clutch on it, and then get it into the Sior. So you can see us here taking off the radiator lines, the heater lines, all of the associated stuff that is attached to the engine. We've got the throttle cable off and the drive shafts out and all that sort of stuff. We did rip off the whole front end to make it a lot easier to just pull the engine out the front nice and straight. So here's me taking the piss out of Mikey and making him do all the work. So this is Mikey's first car project. He hasn't had a whole lot of hands-on experience with the tools as far as I know. So there was a lot of me pointing and telling him what to do. That's kind of how I was trying to teach him, and I think he learnt a lot. It was more so me just going undo this, undo that, do this up and remove this, all that sort of stuff. So he did learn a lot, I think, and we did get a lot done in the end. So here we are pulling the engine out and then stripping it down. So we took the auto gearbox off, the auto trans converter and the flex plate, and then we sorted out the parts to work out what we needed and what we didn't need. And then we lifted the engine up and put it on an engine stand to leave it ready for Mikey to reseal everything. So his plan was to clean it all back, reseal it all and do the timing belt and all that sort of stuff. He got some of it done before I came back the next time, and then we put the engine in anyway. He can do a lot of that stuff later. So the next thing to do was to pull apart the Sior, so pretty much do the exact same job on the other car. So Mikey and his partner Corey, they pulled the front end off, all the headlights and the bumper and everything, took the radiator out and got it all ready to just pull the motor before I got there, which was super handy because it's a fair drive up there and we didn't really get a whole lot of time, unfortunately. So once I got there, we pulled the wiring loom, we pulled the heater hoses, we pulled the throttle cable and the drive shafts, and then pulled the engine straight out. Alright, so it's day 2. We got the engine out of the Sirion in day 1 and the gearbox and everything. Mikey's just under the car taking the exhaust hanger off so we can get the second subframe out. And then today we've taken the engine out of the Sior, gearbox, subframe, taken the rack off. We're going to try and put the power steering rack from the Sirion onto the Sior. So hopefully that bolts in. We did try and fit it straight across, but the steering columns were different. And then we were going to swap the Sirion steering column to the Sior as well. But we ran out of time and just decided to stick with the manual steering and keep those parts for later. And we're also going to upgrade the brakes on the Sior as well. And then the Sior gearbox and the Sirion engine are going together. Once he reseals it, it's on the engine stand just there. And then come back a third day and hopefully put it back in and get it running again. So we're just taking the subframe out so we can steal the rack, and then we're going to strip the under dash and wiring of the Sirion. Success.
Success.
So we're going to strip that dash and all the wiring loom out of the Sirion, the doors as well for the power steering and for the aircon and central locking and power windows. So hopefully jam all of that into this thing. That'll probably be his job later down the road. We'll just get it running and driving again first. So next up you can see us pulling the gearbox off of the Seor engine. So that was the 5-speed manual that we were swapping into the Seor again. So we needed to swap that to the Sirion motor. So we removed that from the Seor engine and then put it on to the Sirion engine with the new clutch and flywheel nicely machined. Alright, so we got the Sirion stripped and back together. Just got the subframe in and the wheels back on so we can roll it around. Taking the steering rack out, as you can see. We're still going to pull the aircon stuff out of this car and some more power steering stuff probably. We've got the two racks on the ground. The problem we're having is the spline on the end of the rack is a different size, so we're going to have to try and pull the column out of the Sirion and hope that bolts into the Seor, or try and get a Seor power steering, which also could be a pain. So that's where we're at with that. Then the engine, so the old engine, we got the gearbox off, got the flywheel and the clutch off so we can get the flywheel machined. Got a bunch of brackets and wires, and this car's pretty much the same. So subframe's waiting to go back in once we get a rack on it, and we're going to pull the interior out of the Sirion now and try and get the steering column out and see if it is the same as the Seor one or not. So here you can see us removing the Sirion dash to get to the wiring and all the aircon bits for the Seor at a later date. Alright, so I've got the engine back together. Gearbox on, fresh clutch in, fresh flywheel, everything's bolted up. So now we're just feeding the wiring through. We're going to do all the fuel lines. Just did the clutch and the speedo, so we've got all the wiring and all the fuel lines and all the things. So hopefully get somewhere today. Alright, so I got the engine back in. We got the air filter on and all the fuel lines and heater lines and stuff. No water and no radiator. Batteries in, ECU's hooked up. Just going to try and give it a start for the first time and hopefully it works. Nothing? Okay. Alright, so we've got the engine back together. We just tried to start it for the first time and had no crank. So we're using the fuse box and starter wiring from the Seor and the engine loom from the Sirion. So it looks like the original starter motor wire doesn't get power in this setup, whereas this one that was floating around does. So I've just swapped those over and that gives us a crank. So whether or not it will start is a different question. Alright, so it's day 4 on the Seor engine swaps, or Sirion Seor conversion engine thingy. So I'd say day 4, but we've actually only done like 3 4-hour days basically. So while I was away, they put the front end back together, bonnet back on, bumper, radiator, battery tray, all that sort of stuff, and just like sort of, you know, got the front back together so it looks like a car again. So when I left last time, we just put brakes on, new pads and rotors. So I need to clean those, and also we're going to bleed the brakes today. We've got the gearbox oil to put in because we didn't have the right like funnel arrangement before. And then we've got to hook up the steering because when we put the subframe in, it didn't really line up perfectly, so we'll get to that. Then wheels and tyres, and I'm sure there's something else I've forgotten. So let's get into it. So once we got the engine back together, we had a few issues with the gearbox leaking. Someone had threaded and actually snapped some of the boss off of the gearbox for the drain plug. So we ended up getting it knocked back roughly to shape and then covering it in JB Weld and then letting it dry. So while we were waiting, we did the brake rotors, we did the new pads, and we also bled the brakes just to make sure that this was all ready to go once the engine actually runs. So another bit of kit that Mickey had to install was a short shifter. So he got this from, I think, Malaysia, he said. It was actually a really nice kit. I'm not sure what brand it was, but I've never installed a short shifter. It was super easy and super straightforward and really well made piece of kit. Alright, so we got everything back together, oil's in, all that sort of stuff. We have a slight problem with the drain plug. So it's been cracked and someone has siliconed it before, so we've chucked some JB weld under there, got the heat gun going, and we've also put some RTV on it, which not the greatest idea, but hopefully we get us back on the road. So we're just waiting for that to go off and then we can do a start. We've done the short shifter, put a new steering wheel on, and got everything back together. So hopefully we should be a drain plug away from driving this thing. Alright, so under the car here, that is the fill plug, which we have successfully sealed. And this is the drain plug, which is now covered in JB weld to try and seal. So we just filled up the oil and it looks like it's not leaking. So we're hoping this is going to hold. He does have another gearbox, so we can swap it over later, but this one will hopefully get us back on the road. Alright, just off the jack stands. I mean, only one thing. Let's try and start it and try and reverse it out of here. Alright, so we just tried to start her up and it's quite a high idle. We forgot to put the booster hose back on. So we'll take this one off of this engine and put it on this one and try again. Alright, so we've done a fair bit of diagnostics. We have pulsed the injectors, we have swapped coils, swapped spark plugs, pulled out and swapped over the O2 sensor, and then we've also disconnected sensors while it's running and checked that they all work. Everything seems okay, it's just running a bit rough, which is a bit strange, but it is a 3-cylinder, so maybe that's how it's supposed to run. It's been a while since I've 3 cylinders. It also has a pod filter and a side pipe, so it could be anything. Alright, so this is where the filming went downhill. So we got the car back together, we got everything in, we got everything installed, and we started it up, and it wasn't running right. So to start with, I thought I was just used to 4 cylinders and didn't know what a 3-cylinder sounded like anymore. Turns out it was really only running on 1 cylinder really well and 2 cylinders not particularly well. So when this engine was in the Sirion, I actually never heard it running. Mikey said it was good, which I probably should have checked, but live and learn. So turns out that there was an issue with the engine in the other car, and we followed it across to the Sirion. So I've tried to fix this thing. I spent about 2 or 3 hours, even when Mickey went to work, and I spent another hour or so trying to fix this problem. I replaced ECUs, wiring looms, injectors, throttle position sensors, O2 sensors, absolutely every sensor pretty much on the whole engine. Changed coils, changed plugs, changed injectors, tried everything I could think of to try and make this thing go. And even with all of my best efforts, I still couldn't get this thing to run correctly. It seems as though cylinder 3 is really low on compression. So originally I thought it was injectors giving it the wrong amount of fuel. If you take the coil out, it runs exactly the same. So I checked the coil had spark, that had spark, so that was all good. And then the only thing I could think of was the injector not firing properly. So I changed injectors around and the problem actually got worse. So the other injectors that have been sitting around a bit longer were obviously not as good. With everything I tried, it was constantly cylinder 3. So I'm thinking that cylinder 3 is low on compression. So Mikey hasn't done a compression test yet, and I haven't driven back up there. It's a long way to drive to get some bad news. So I'm trying to stay out of that and let him do the compression test. But I do think cylinder 3 is hurt and this engine's probably no good. In saying that, he was driving the Sirion as it is now in the Sior. So I guess he could continue driving it, but I don't think it's gonna last all that long, unfortunately. Alright, so moving forwards, Mikey's gonna either have to try and find out what the problem is, get someone a lot smarter than me to try and work that out because I'm out of ideas, or possibly rebuild the engine that was in the Sior. Apparently that one ran pretty good, but it was really smoky, so there is the option of rebuilding that one, which was the plan long term anyway, but for now we were going to try and make the Sirion motor work in the Sior, just drive that and then get him to rebuild the other engine, but it's not looking so good. So like I said, that's basically all I can do to help, unfortunately. I'm not able to rebuild motors and I'm out of ideas on what the actual problem would be. So I really hope that he appreciates my help. I hope he didn't feel like I dropped him in it a bit, but the results weren't completely fantastic, but he does have a running driving Sior, which he did have before, and it has the Sirion engine in it, which is what he wants to do. And the Sirion is stripped, so he can get rid of that. So worst case, he's sort of just condensed these problems into one car rather than having two problems in two cars. But it was a good time to go up there, make a new friend, meet a subscriber, and help him out with his car projects. It was pretty cool hanging out with him and his partner Corey, but unfortunately we didn't get a great result. So, not sure where to go from here, but thank you for watching, and we'll see you next week.